Yeah, hello there. My name is Nigel Douglas, and I am a drama director. Okay, so I came in really with the sort of change of the guard, if you like, London's Burning. So London's Burning had been under the auspices of Paul Knight for several years. It was really his show; he created it. Um, then at that point, there was sort of buying up of various ITV franchises, and London Weekend Television brought London's Burning off of Paul, and in came a new set of producers, and I came in with that bunch of producers under the guidance at that time of Laura Mackey, who was sort of head of drama at LWT. And I came to arrive really at London's Burning because I had been working on Casualty, the BBC show, where I'd been blowing quite a lot of things up and setting fire to things. So I was sort of one of a few directors in the country who had some experience about working with fire and how you can put fire on the screen. So that's sort of how I came back. I don't really remember the specifics. I wish I could. I remember we used to film quite a lot around the tower, and I remember I think that may have been the episode that introduced an Irish actor, and we did some post pipe stuff and some climbing up the tower. I don't really remember the early episodes. I can remember distinctly sort of two significant, three significant escapes that we did. But the first one I recall is we burnt down a cinema and did a fairly big rescue in the cinema. I remember something to do with a big sand grain dumper and losing someone in the sand dumper, which was incredibly complicated to shoot. So that's probably why it stayed in my mind. And then the big piece that we did, which I think is the next season that you're talking about, which I think might open the episodes, was the hotel fire at down in Greenwich and in Woolwich, and that was massive, and that I think had been the biggest burn that the show had ever done. So I remember those set pieces, but I can't remember the specifics of any episodes, I'm afraid. So we were based at Long Lane Studios in Borough, near Borough Market, and we had the full set was built there, and some exterior stuff there. The show was roughly divided sort of 50-50 of the stuff that we shot around the set with the guys, and then 50% sort of on location. Obviously, the locations were always quite difficult to find because of the nature of what we did. So obviously, by setting fire to quite a lot of things, principally we always had to try and find locations that had already burned down and that we could rebuild and burn down again, rather than find sort of obviously pristine things, which is why we ended up quite often at Woolwich Arsenal at the time, because it was pretty much empty buildings at that stage, and we could transform those into whatever we needed to think, and there were streets and so on and so forth. So we did shoot down there a lot, and we shot up and around the river quite a lot as well at that time. Yeah, that's all I can remember really about the location. Yeah, again, sort of very thin, really. Looking back, I've worked with a few of them since. I've worked with Heather Keith a couple of times, and I've worked with Jonathan Guy Lewis a couple of times since. I mean, it was a pretty happy band of people, really. I think you know, everybody had been working on the show, particularly the sort of main cast, for some time, so everybody understood what their characters were and how they fitted into things, and they all kind of got along quite well. So we were quite settled really when we were at Long Lane. I think everybody really enjoyed it, and probably more than that, that the regular actors understood how to work with the sort of issues that we had on that show, you know, which was sort of two really. I mean, one is obviously working with fire, and quite significant fire, which has its own issues as an actor. But also working with the fire engines and working with the pumps and the water. They're like machine guns, those hoses. You know, they fire ferociously. And I certainly remember, you know, every now and then we'd get a new regular cast member, and we'd sort of give them a training session with the hoses, and it'd knock them off their feet. You know, it was so powerful till you got used to them. But you know, all the time we were under the sort of amazing sort of advice from Roger Kendall, who I'm sure you're very aware of, who was really not just an advisor to the show technically, but was sort of in many ways the kind of heart and soul of the show, an amazing fireman in his own right, done and been at some amazing real life fire events, and he was always very brilliant with the cast, and everybody loved him. So the process really began with an initial script, which was sort of very much a sort of working script, really, in the early days of London's Burning, excuse me. Because we would work with the writers to try and find, obviously, an interesting idea or something that we hadn't burnt down before, something that we could afford. Then we would obviously have to go out and try and find a location to do that, and the location then always informed how we would do that stunt or that fire sequence. And then working with the production designer, we would create a scenario that we could fit into the schedule, and you know, and then we'd sort of select which of the firemen and firewomen were going to be the ones that sort of involved in that. But the challenge on London's Burning was always finding fires that we could put the actors into, because obviously, you know, the difference in a way from London's Burning than, say, Casualty or The Bill, which I've directed a lot of both, is you know, the firemen on the whole stand outside and point the hose at the fire which is inside, and there's no jeopardy for your characters then. So you're always looking to saying, how can we find a way of getting our characters into the fire and at risk? So that process would take place, and that would take place over about maybe 2 to 4 weeks of planning. And then we'd rewrite the scripts to fit whatever we were going to do. Then the actors would get the scripts, and then we would shoot. Generally, we would do the fire sequences towards the end of the process of the shooting period to allow us more time to design and build. Some of the fires we did in a special fire studio, which allowed us to actually build the set inside the studio, which we then burned down again. It's sort of a bizarre process when you think about it. Is we would build a house from scratch inside a studio, and then 2 weeks later we'd burn it to the ground and sweep out the ashes and start again, build another one that we were going to burn down. So that would be that process, and then it would take about 4 to 6 weeks to edit it all together. Of course, also these were the days when we shot on film, so rather than shoot on digitally, which we shoot pretty much everything on there. So slightly longer editing process as various processes of film editing place. So yeah, so that would be the process. So we would shoot sort of an episode at a time, but in blocks of 2. So my unit would shoot for 4 weeks effectively and shoot 2 episodes. The cinema we burnt down was in Peckham or Southeast London somewhere, and we had managed to find a cinema that had already burnt, and we were able to rebuild it. So the episode I did had the upper half. The story was that it had been an old theatre, and it had a dress circle, and that collapsed.
Yeah.
think I really enjoyed the hotel fire because it had a lot of complicated parts. It was an enormous undertaking, you know, to burn a sort of 5-story building. We we had visual effects people in every single window of the hotel at one point on fire, which was massive. It was so hot there that you couldn't even stand near the set. We had to have everybody well back from the set. And we had all the engines out and, you know, everything there. And there were a few kind of quite nice tricks that we were able to do in that, which I kind of enjoyed. So we had the actors running downstairs and then behind the pillar, and then behind the pillar were the stunt people, and we would swap them as they were running. We'd swap, so they'd run, and then the stunt guys would run off, hit the fire, run back, swap back to the actors. And the actors. So there were quite a lot of sort of fun parts to that, I think. The other great sort of exciting part of that, I don't know if you're familiar with the episode, but it sort of had two halves to the fire. One was like a disco that was taking place in the basement of the hotel, and then there was the hotel itself. We set a lot of squibs explosives behind all the optics in the basement fire. And they all went up great, and we were filming. So there was just me and my cameraman, Mike Spragg, filming in there with some real firemen. And the hardest thing to get on fire on screen is black smoke, because the smoke we use is fake, you know, and it's grey. And because obviously it's not dangerous to inhale. But it never quite looks right. And the holy grail for directors was to try and get this dark smoke that looked effective. And also smoke, when it's real, rolls across the ceiling and then starts to come down. And we'd never really got that really exciting, so that we get that cloud coming down. And when we were filming the basement level, we just had a little bit of fire. It wasn't dangerous, but a little bit of fire got behind the set and started to set a bit of the wood behind on fire, and we suddenly had the cloud come, and we were all lying on the ground filming, and it came down. And I remember that being really exciting and sort of finally getting this really impactful thing. And so, yeah, I quite enjoyed that episode, I think, filming that sequence. Yeah, partly because of the scale, and it was big, and partly because it was quite a good story, and it enabled us to put George into the middle of the fire, and you know, and I think it was quite a good episode for Jonathan as well, you know, sort of being in command of it all and so on and so forth. So yeah, so that was I think probably the process I enjoyed most. But I think that as a show, I really enjoyed the ambition of London's Burning, and I think, you know, we always approach things to try and make it the biggest we possibly could, and the most on-screen looking dangerous as we possibly could. And I think also it was, I don't know if you'd agree, but I think, you know, the late 90s were really seeing the change in television away from character television. You know, London's Burning strength to me was it was about the guys, it was about their characters, about the banter that they had between them. That's what made it strong, I think. And, you know, the sort of turn of the century really started to move away from that type of drama, which was about characters, and more into story-led, narrative-led drama. So yeah, so that was a really good time, I think, that season. My memories mostly, as I suspect most people that you'll talk to behind the camera, are really to do with groups of people and sort of the adventures that you go on together, particularly your kind of close crew, you know. So for directors, it's sort of your first assistants and your DOP and cameraman, you know, the people that you spend a lot of time with. So, and they've all remained good friends, you know, from that time, so 25 years on from that time. And my memories are mostly about being in certain places with certain people, you know. But as a whole, as I say, and I wish I could be more specific, but it was such a long time ago. You know, I don't remember specific episodes very well now, but I can remember certain moments and certain days that we did something, or you know, when we were burning the cinema down, we went in to do the big. So we always used to try and do a shot with the real firemen, and we'd take the camera in with them. And I remember that day of going into that fire, which was a furnace, and there was fire everywhere, and trying to hold the camera and fire burning all around you, and smoke, and the firemen pushing us around, and coming out of that with sort of real adrenaline and a real sense, perhaps, that it's the closest we'd ever get to what it would be like to do that for real. Yeah, so the London Fire Brigade, we had a good working relationship with the London Fire Brigade. So, I mean, every fire that we undertook, we obviously had to assess very carefully about controlling it, and fire, like all things on television, is smoke and mirrors. Where if you see it on set, it's less fire than it appears on screen, but nonetheless, it's still fire. And so the London Fire Brigade were really helpful, not just in advising us, and obviously lending us Roger Kendall, but often we would have real firemen from the London Fire Brigade who would be coming and demonstrating what they did, or would be helping us develop scripts, to do so on and so forth. And there were times when we sort of blagged kit from them and borrowed stuff and so on and so forth. I mean, obviously at the end of the day, we were a drama, and we never came in front of the real thing, and we tried not to get in their way. We did have a couple of times along the way where, despite the fact we notified the fire brigade that we were filming, that somebody, a passerby somewhere distant, would see a fire and call 999, and we'd have the real fire brigade turn up to what was a pretend fire, and finding some of their friends from the London Fire Brigade already there in our fire engine. So that was always sort of a bit of an awkward moment, but that happened. Yeah, so most of that predated me, really. So we did occasionally do shots of our engines leaving, the shutters going up and the engines coming out of the station, but we didn't ever really work in another station during the time I was there. So certainly the earlier seasons, I know they did have a closer relationship with Dockhead, and they certainly shot around there much more. The long lane setup was pretty much everything we needed, and we had quite a lot of stock shots of the engines leaving, the pumps leaving the actual station. So yeah, in my time we didn't really shoot stuff very much. Well, in the 25 years that since I left directed on Burning, I've pretty much directed most things that have been on television. So since doing that, more recently I directed Wild at Heart in South Africa. I directed Inspector Lindy Mysteries, Hotel Babylon on BBC One, and I've just completed a Netflix show during the summer. But most exciting is I'm literally about next week to go into rehearsals with a play, which is opening at Park Theatre in North London, which was written by one of the actors from The Bill, Sally Rogers, and stars one of the actors from The Bill, Chris Simmons. So we'd obviously love to see any of you guys down there if you want to come down and have a chat and a beer, and I'll probably try and remember more then. So yeah, so at the moment I'm doing a theatre production. I am in the early stages of producing a feature film, which is being shot in Malta later this year. So yeah, still very much there, directing and writing. Still loving it. Anyway, listen, it's a real pleasure to meet you, and keep up the good work. And I'm absolutely thrilled that there's such a still love for the show that we all loved.